When we talk about the history of literature, there are these names that just echo through time. They're absolute legends. But what about the names that don't? History, well, it's packed with these brilliant minds who just kind of get lost along the way. Today, we're going to pull one of those figures right back into the spotlight. So let's dive in. Okay, so when I say great romantic poets, who pops into your head? I'm betting Wordsworth. Coleridge, right? I mean, these guys were absolute giants. They literally built a literary revolution. But here's the twist. It wasn't just a two-man show. Nope, it was a trio. So who was the third guy? That would be Robert Southey. And look, while his name isn't as famous today, back then, he was an absolute powerhouse, a huge force in defining the entire Romantic era. I'm talking poet, essayist, historian, a major public intellectual, the whole package. So let's really dig into why this guy deserves to be remembered. All right, first up, let's talk about Southey, the storyteller. Because, oh man, this guy was a master of the epic poem. He was weaving these gigantic, complex worlds, mixing mythology, history, pure, unadulterated adventure, all on a scale that, honestly, most other writers of his time wouldn't even dream of trying. And he got started early with Joan of Arc. What he does here is pretty amazing. He takes this historical figure we all know and just elevates her into a true mythic hero. So this poem, it's not just some dry history lesson. No way. It's all about courage, faith, national pride, and you get this really human, really inspiring portrait of Joan as she's grappling with this incredible divine mission. Then he completely switches gears and throws us into this fantastical world pulled straight from Arabian stories in a poem called Thalaba the Destroyer. And this is pure classic hero's quest stuff. An epic fight between good and evil, packed with all this rich, exotic imagery. It just perfectly nails that romantic obsession with all things heroic and sublime. And that brings us to what's probably his most famous epic, The Curse of Kehema. And here you can just feel the ambition jumping off the page. He dives into Indian mythology to tell this story of a tyrant who wants to become a god. It's this really deep, kind of scary look at how power corrupts, and the absolutely terrifying results of ambition that's just left to run wild. But here's the thing. Southey wasn't just off in some fantasy land of myths and monsters. Not at all. He was plugged right into the real world. I mean, deeply engaged. And he used his writing as this incredibly powerful tool for social commentary, which turned him into a major public voice, one with a really strong moral compass. I mean, just take a look at the range of things he stood for. He was a vocal opponent of slavery, and this was at a time when that was not the popular opinion. He supported the rights of the working class. He was a sharp critic of colonialism. Time and time again, he used his platform to speak up for those who couldn't and to call out the injustices he saw all around him. And please, don't think this was just some side gig for him. It wasn't a footnote. From his epic poems to his essays, that powerful moral conscience was at the absolute core of who he was as a writer. Especially when he became Poet Laureate, he really felt it was his duty to get involved with the country's biggest problems. So we've got the myth maker and the social justice warrior. But there's another layer to him. Southey was also a historian and a biographer. He was fascinated with how a nation remembers its own story and how it thinks about its heroes. So he wasn't just telling stories, he was actively shaping the national identity. And you can see this incredible complexity in his work. Just look at this contrast. On one hand, you have his book, The Life of Nelson. It's this big celebration of a national hero, really helping to shape the idea of British naval might. But then, just a few years later, he writes The Poet's Pilgrimage to Waterloo. And it's this incredibly somber, thoughtful piece about the true human cost of war. So he could cheer for the hero, but at the same time ask, was it worth the price? So through writing like this, Southey wasn't just a reporter of history, he was an interpreter. He was literally helping to mold how the public saw figures like Nelson. He gave an entire generation a new lens through which to view their country's past. Okay, so we've got the epic poet, the social reformer, and the national historian all rolled into one. Let's try to pull all these threads together now and really think about the legacy of this romantic master who, for some reason, we've kind of forgotten. So why does Robert Southey still matter? Well, for one, he was a founding father of the Romantic movement. He was an absolute master of these grand, epic stories. He was a relentless voice for social justice, and he was a major architect of England's national memory. Honestly, any one of those things would make a career. All of them together, that paints a picture of a true literary giant.
When you boil it all down, Southey was a writer with just incredible range and depth. You can see in his work this mind that was always wrestling with the biggest questions you can ask. Questions about history, power, culture, and what it means to be moral. His voice was, well, it was unique, it was powerful, and it was incredibly influential.
And all of this brings us to one last big question that just kind of hangs in the air. If Southey was this important, a cornerstone of his whole era, why do we forget people like him? Why is it that some great voices echo for centuries while others that were just as powerful, just as important, seem to fade away into the background of history?